I'm a very simple person, so I will give you some very simple thoughts about the topic of housing, and I hope I can inspire you for discussion. I was asked why Austria is different than a lot of other countries concerning housing, and so I have to go a little bit back in history of Austria to show you how the development in Austria was. I have no figures about Austria at 1910 because Austria then doesn't exist. It was a monarchy, Austrian-Hungarian, and a very, very large kingdom. And so I have taken only the figures of Vienna, for showing you some impression of the situation in these times. We don't know them anymore. The population of Vienna today is around 1.8 million, for informing you. 1910 it was around 2 million. We had around 480,000 flats, 4.8 persons a flat. These flats normally were under 30 square meters. They had no water, no toilet, no bus, no gas, no electricity, and a lot of lack of daylight. In Austria, Vienna was, together with Budapest, was called the city of TBC. A lot of children were very, very ill, and rachitis, I don't know if the English word is correct, was a very common illness of children. The costs were, concerning this kind of flats, around the family income, 30%, 50% of the tenants paid 30% of their income for housing, and around 300,000 people had no accommodation. It was a time of liberal housing market. We had no rules in Austria at this time. There was no support for housing construction from the state. It was a kingdom. There were no limitation for rents, and there were no duration of contracts. You had no guarantee to stay in the flat. The landlord could finish the contract whenever he wanted or she wanted. So then the First World War came, and that was a crucial situation for the king, because the soldiers were very worrying about their families, that they are kicked out of their houses. So the king decided that it is better to make regulation, and in the 1917 we had the first regulation in tenant law that tenants cannot be kicked out of their houses. After the war, this provisorial became a law. It's called the rental law, introduced 1922, and it fixed all rents on the level of 1917. As there was a time of a lot of inflation, that meant that a lot of contracts, a lot of rents became very cheap. In the 30s, the income level was 3% of the household income. A second result was that ground became very cheap, and that private owners sold their ground to the state, especially in Vienna to the Viennese government. And Vienna started a big campaign of housing construction for low-income people. So in the time between 1910 and 1934, 65,000 flats were built on a very high level compared at this time. Today Vienna, Austria has around 8 million inhabitants. We have about 3.6 million households. Around 40% of Austrians are tenants. In Vienna are 75. We have 43 square meters per person, 2.9 people per flat. In Vienna, some less. And we have a very mixed age of our flats. And we have almost half of our flats are 1- and 2-family houses. So that's the background today. The housing stock is divided in private owners from 1- and 2-family houses, condominiums, other private owners. In Vienna, we have around 220,000 communal owner houses, and around in Austria at all, we have around 575,000 non-profit housing flats. So a very mixed housing stock. Till 1994, private rents were fixed on a certain limit, which also had influence on the housing costs. The profit in investing in housing was not so high according to these rent limits. And in the 90s, there was a big political change in whole Europe. The liberal markets became very popular, and everyone thought that it has to be liberal, and free markets became mainstream. And also in Austria, we had a coalition between Social Democrats and Conservative Party, and they together opened the private rent market. As an effect of this intervention, ground costs increased, housing construction costs increased also, and now we have the situation that newcomers on the market have on the one hand less income than their parents or their grandparents when they started, and on the other side they are confronted with much higher housing costs than their parents. We had a long time a political attitude that tenants and house owners should have equality of security concerning housing. This political attitude has gone. So today, the actual political mainstream is people serve markets instead of the other way around. That leads to reduction of financial support in all social and social political related fields. Today, we are confronted with the fiscal pact. To my mind, we repeat the 30s of the last century. It has a very destructive, or it will have a very destructive influence on our societies. At the beginning, we can already see in Greece and Spain. It will not solve our economical problems, to my mind. It will reduce our space for political scope of actions, and for me it is a reaction made under stress and fear. And decisions made under stress and fear mostly are not very wise. So we need another form of perception for finding other solutions, to my mind, and there are always more ways than one. I concentrate on housing sector. We need a political attitude that everyone has the right for high quality and affordable houses. And I also believe that we need a political attitude that tenants and owners have equal rights. The political attitude that income out of selling or renting houses has to have limits. Otherwise, we will not be able to restrict the profits. And without restriction the profits, housing costs will increase and increase and increase, because there's no reason why it should stop. Society is growing, households are growing, so the markets of the seekers is growing, but the market of the offering is reducing. And I believe also that it is a responsibility of the states to make that happen, that there is enough housing affordable. Because affordable housing is the problem, not housing. We have enough houses in Europe. I mean, in Spain there are 3 million empty houses. So it's not a lack of houses, but it's a lack of affordable houses. So we need clear perception, which rules and regulations are necessary to reach this goal without sticking on old thinkings. I think we have seen all that the old ways doesn't function. We have to try something else. And I believe also that society and individuals have not the same interest, but both has to be respected. We need both. So we need to look where are the limits of the market and where should be the supportive rule of the state to guarantee a diversity of housing models. Because people are diverse, so we need also diversity of housing models. I think that housing as a basic need, beside food, water, energy, is very important for social peace. And if we would like to have social peace in the future, we should try to handle this problem in a fair way and not leave this part of the market, the free market, the investors only. My personal opinion is, and you see it in Austria, that we have a lot of mixture. We have one-family houses, we have condominium, we have private sector with limited rents, we have private sector with free rents. So we have a lot of diverse markets, which is, and the state has the responsibility to look, does it function? And if it doesn't function, he has to interfere. And also we have in Austria a system that everybody, every worker, every employee pays a certain amount of money in a fund from which on we pay subsidies for housing construction. That is one reason why in Austria since 1922 we have built houses all the time. And building houses is also a motor for economy. So in Austria, subsidies is not only looked to help people, but subsidies can also be a motor for investment. So to my mind, the European community would be wise if they would cope our model in a way and try to, I mean, there are some basics here for this motor, but we would need it more intensive in regions like Spain, where the unemployment rate of the youth so high, or in Italy, where 75% of the people live with their parents because they cannot afford their housing alone. So there had to be some motor for investment on the one hand, so to get place for works, on the other hand, to have affordable houses. So that is my conclusion, and I hope some provocation for you for discussion.